your biography could take us probably the 40-30 minutes that we have with that you have with us. What I would do instead is that I will take this opportunity to do sort of a computational antitrust biography. Very nice to see you. So Susan, for everyone out there, is the chief economist at the DOJ Antitrust Division, which I'm sure you're aware of. She is also the economics of technology professor in the School of Humanities and Sciences at the Stanford Graduate School of Business, where she is currently on leave. Now, what is maybe more specific to computational antitrust is that Susan has published dozens of articles, including one, estimation and inference of heterogeneous treatments effects using random forests; two, when should you adjust standard errors for clustering; and three, the impact of machine learning on economics. So in other words, Susan is working at the frontier between economics and computer science, which is the main reason why we couldn't hope for a better keynote speaker. Susan, thank you so very much for joining us, and the floor is yours.
Hi, can you hear me well?
Perfectly well.
Great. Thank you so much for having me here. And I would like to say it's great to be back home at Stanford, but I guess it's great to be back on a Stanford Zoom. It's about as good as we can get. And it's really wonderful that you've put this event together. Especially being in government and realizing how scarce resources are and how difficult it is to just, find people to gather information and help us keep on top of trends. The work that you're doing and the research you're pushing forward is incredibly valuable. I'm now 18 months into my time as chief economist at the Antitrust Division, so it's actually a really great time to take stock of where we are in the US and in the Antitrust Division and where we're going. So to start with, the foundations of expanding the use of computational tools in antitrust include people, computing infrastructure, software, data, and although there are ways to hack our way to make faster progress, like using consultants and contractors and academic visitors, and like me, but others too, to make things really sustainable, we do need to have some of those capabilities embedded inside the regulatory authorities. It has a lot of advantages. Our investigations, policy issues move very quickly. I'm finding that, I have to comment on something coming across my desk from, policy initiatives to things other agencies are worried about or international enforcers are worried about, and we have to comment very quickly. Our investigations, especially merger investigations, are on very tight timelines. And so it's really helpful and frankly, a lot less expensive if we can do these things ourselves and understand them at the point that we're triaging. And one of the things that really surprised me and sort of I found a little bit concerning when I came into government was realizing just how much across all of the government we are outsourcing a lot of this work to contractors and consultants, which is efficient in some ways, but it's expensive in other ways. And as this work becomes more central to what we do, again, having it in-house is super important. Last year you had our chief technologist, who I was very proud that we were able to bring in, Laura Edelson, who's a computer scientist, who was a visiting academic. This year we're hosting Lin Wu, who's an operations scholar from UPenn. And in addition, we've been doing quite a bit to hire and build up our technology and data science expertise in-house. But given how hard it is and sometimes painfully slow to improve, prioritization is really important. And so therefore, it's important, as I've been thinking about building things out, to understand the capabilities we already have and what we do so that we can maximize the impact of our investments. So I'll start out by maybe giving a little bit of history and context for what we do. Actually, in the US, in some ways, we're very far ahead of a lot of our other counterparts in having extremely large and high quality teams that we've built up over decades of people that that do a lot of data work. But we are also very much in need of expanding and modernizing our capabilities to meet the latest challenges. So, and then I'll turn to talk at the end about some advances and opportunities in applying a computational antitrust outside of data. But just to start with, if when you talk about computer science or machine learning or computational social science or computational anything, it's important to, if we're talking about the data part of it, it's important to step back and realize that a lot of these areas and disciplines have been working with data and really developing very tailored and specialized methods that are highly optimized and sort of, they're always at the frontier for the specific problems that they've been working on. So we just celebrated 50 years of the it's called EAG, now titled Expert Analysis Group at the Antitrust Division, which had been probably for the longest period the Economic Analysis Group. And it's been retitled Expert Analysis Group to reflect that we are bringing in a lot of other adjacent fields, everything from behavioral to technology. But all these years, we've been doing what has now been rebranded and sort of sub-specialized, if you like, into data engineering, data description, and data analytics using a whole variety of statistical techniques. Right now, when I joined, we had about 50 PhD economists and 8 statisticians. That's in the Antitrust Division. And at the FTC, there's also a very large group. And actually, they've also been expanding, for example, putting together a technology team that's distinct. But then since I joined, we've created new teams, a data science team, a technology policy team, and we've been actively hiring into that with several new people joining over the last few months to really expand our capabilities in new directions. For example, our new data scientists were chosen to complement the large and deep expertise we already had with data for their specific expertise in things like algorithms or modern tools for analyzing larger data sets, machine learning, and so on. So, what do we do and how does that help prioritize our needs? Well, one of the biggest things, most common things we do is we investigate mergers. There are thousands of mergers that are reported to us every year. Dozens go to a more advanced stage of investigation, where after an initial review that determines there may be competition concerns. And in those more in-depth investigations, again, only a subset of the thousands, we will request data through things like civil investigative demands, whereby the merging firms and sometimes other firms in the industry respond to our request for their data. Now, we have to do this on a very tight timeline, and the firms aren't always happy to be doing this, although they're generally cooperative. And so it's really important to know what you're looking for and anticipate and make those requests properly, because often you only get one bite at the apple under the very tight timelines we're under, because firms are merging and it needs to move. So one of the things that some of the things we need to do is first just think about what questions might we want to ask, and I'll come back in a few minutes to some examples of those. Anticipating those questions, we need to think, well, what data might they have? What data might the firms have that would help us answer the questions? And of course, there's often some close relationship to the questions we need to ask and the questions the firms need to ask. The firms are trying to decide what price to set, and we need to understand about their incentives to set prices and how a merger might impact those incentives. So if you understand how firms think about things and use data to do things like set prices or choose quality or decide where to enter and so on, and how they gather data about their customer preferences, if you understand what the firms are doing themselves, you can better anticipate what questions to ask the firms and look for. It's very helpful to understand what kinds of data they might be creating in the regular course of business. If you understand how you operate a website and what needs to be logged when you operate a website, and understand that some data is needed by certain operational teams and other data is used and aggregated by the companies to do analytics, then you can start anticipating where you might find the data, how it's collected, how it's stored, and so on. And so getting people who have some experience with that, who really understand, what data must be created, is helpful. From just personally, from all of my years of experience, if I look at a website or I look at a service a company's providing, I'm like, okay, they've got to have this, this, and this, and this, or else, these results couldn't possibly appear on the screen. So you're able to reverse engineer with a little bit of experience, just intuitively what's going on, and that can be really helpful. You can anticipate, will they be doing A/B testing, and what kinds of data might be created from A/B testing and randomized experiments that they might be conducting. And if you understand a little bit how algorithms work and how they might be implemented, you can also anticipate and make decisions about what to ask for. Now, once you've kind of figured out at a high level what to do, there's also a lot of data engineering. I mean, this data might be distributed. Firms themselves have a hard time, joining data sets from multiple sources, and a lot of times firms haven't gotten along the journey to having their own data as useful as it could be for them. And that's actually been a big thing for the last 10 years, is firms are just trying to figure out themselves how to use their data. And now here we are coming from the outside, and we've got to understand it and get it right in a very short amount of time. So there's the data engineering, figuring out how to join the data in a reliable way and make sure it's correct. And that requires knowledge of data engineering. Once you have the data and get it on board, of course, you have to have a place to store it. And if it's large, then you may not be able to use the traditional tools that we used in the past. So, historically, we used often, desktop software, packaged statistical software that, in order to analyze data sets, that often would store everything in memory, and was not optimized for these larger data sets. And so even if conceptually we're doing a lot of the same tasks that we did before, just implementing them is different with larger data sets. And so that's one of the capabilities we're trying to get in. And of course, once you get the people in, if they can't use the software, we don't have the software, if the software is not approved, that can be another big challenge. And so I think the government's getting better at this, but we still need to have more streamlined procedures when a lot of the software that's being used is open source, or is not a package that you buy once and install, and then you don't have to mess with it for another year. So what are we doing with all this data? Well, if we think about how we're going to then use the data in investigations or litigation, let me focus on mergers again, and actually let me even focus more on mergers between two firms selling similar products for simplicity, just that's easiest to talk about. And that's our most common scenario. Then we would use data to do things like define relevant antitrust markets, to figure out basically which products compete with each other the most strongly, and to measure the intensity of competition between two firms and understand how their merger would spill over to competition in the industry as a whole. So there's all sorts of tools and analytics we would use to answer those kinds of questions. One type of example that's not always possible, but in some industries it is, you can look historically at entry and exit events. So especially like in industries where there's a lot of local competition, firms might enter a city, exit a city, or enter different geographies. You might have also just firms coming in and out. You might have historical price changes, and I'll come back to that. That's sometimes useful and sometimes not. It depends on why the price changed. And so we can use that data to try to do causal inference. We want to understand what was the causal effect of a firm entering on competition and outcomes in a market. Now, anytime you are estimating causal effects, that is a hard science, and it's been something that's been the subject of really decades and decades of careful advances in both statistical methodology and an implied practice that makes it reliable. There's substantive assumptions required. That's because for causal inference, we want to know, we see what happened in the world, but we need to know what would have happened if the firm hadn't entered. The causal effect is the effect of entry or effect of exit. And of course, that's relevant for understanding what would happen in a merger, which may remove a competitor from the market. So if you are doing that kind of work, you are estimating a counterfactual. So, like, for example, you want to know what would have happened in that market if a firm hadn't entered or exited, and you need to take into account time trends and industry trends and other things where things might have changed in that market, even if there hadn't been a merger. And counterfactuals are hard because at any particular observation, you see it either with the intervention or without the intervention, but you never see them both at the same time. That's the fundamental problem of causal inference. It can be solved when you run, it's easier to analyze causal inference if you have a randomized experiment, because then you've randomized who has the intervention and who doesn't have the intervention. But things like entry and exit are rarely randomized, although they can be now in the modern economy with large-scale experimentation, which is something I've worked on a lot in my research. But in general, we don't have that luxury of randomized experiments. So then we have what we call natural experiments, and we have this challenge of separating out correlation from causation, and that in turn requires adjusting for things that are changing in the background. So another type of analysis is analyzing how sensitive are customers to prices. And you can analyze that by looking at consumer choice data and seeing how consumers have responded to changes in price or quality in the past. So now how do you do this, and why do we actually need anything new at all if we've been studying this for so long and we have such well-established techniques? Well, first of all, I mentioned before that if with larger data sets, it's actually often just not even possible to apply those techniques because the software packages that are available don't scale. That's something I've been working on in my lab at Stanford, like building scalable methods for studying consumer choice that use GPUs. Also for bringing in ideas from the computer science literature, like embeddings, foundation models and fine tuning. And you can use lots of data about shopping across lots of products and build a foundation model with embeddings for products, and then use those in a specific, more focused analysis of a few products. You can study heterogeneous treatment effects when you have lots of granular data, and you can see who's responsive to price and who's not. So those have been things I've done a ton of in my academic work, and it's starting to really take hold in applied social sciences and applied economics across the board. It's becoming very, very popular, but there's still a long time to translate from the methods to the applied academic literature to actually, investigations and litigation. And in litigation, people can tend to be pretty risk averse because, they know how to present a regression to a judge. They've explained it before. It's established, where we just don't have a lot of examples of people explaining and presenting a machine learning model to a judge or a jury. Now, personally, I've been out there explaining all of these things to lots of different people, to business people, to MBAs, to executives, and I don't think there's anything fundamentally harder about explaining machine learning than there is about explaining simple regressions. In fact, in some ways, it's easier because the machine learning part is often the predictive part. You're combining that predictive part with this causal inference part. And for predictive work, you can hold out a test set and kind of show how well your predictive model works. So you can kind of shortcut the explanation of what the code does and just show, hey, look, in a test set, this works. And this is how well it works. This is the quality of the prediction. This is why this model and not some other model, because it predicts better. So it's much more objective in terms of showing which machine learning model you chose. So I don't think it's fundamentally harder, but we're just lacking that experience. And so that's going to be one of the frontiers over the next 5 or 10 years, is just getting that experience and getting people comfortable with using it. That's also going to allow us to bring in things like text data and image data, which again is coming. It's very big in the applied economics and political science, other social science literatures and marketing. It's all over the place. But we're still just on the frontier of really getting it into practice in these investigations and litigation. So those are some of the things that I think we need to work on, and we also maybe need to write more translational articles to give these examples of how do you explain it, so that an attorney can help make the decision and get a sense of what it would look like to use the methods in practice. Let me just say a few other words about some other topics that are less data related. I've spent most of my time talking about data, which of course is a big passion of mine, but there's other things that are also very much top of mind. One thing that I found increasingly concerning in recent years is how advances in digitization have affected competition from a tacit collusion perspective, or even explicit collusion. Since at least the 1980s, there has been an academic literature seeing how algorithms can cooperate. In fact, like back in 1988, when I was a young undergraduate, one of the first things I used was like a genetic algorithm to see if these algorithms could learn to play Prisoner's Dilemmas games, or like these pricing collusion games. And so even with 1980s computing and very simple algorithms that were very ad hoc, you could show how easy it was for algorithms playing games with each other to learn to engage in tacit collusion. And more recently, people have advanced those ideas and replicated and elaborated about how that works with, you would use neural networks or other types of AI reinforcement learning to learn to price. And so that used to be like a little more of an academic issue that only would be relevant in a small number of markets that were actually using algorithms. But now, it's just cutting across our whole economy. And so one thing that really concerns me is that as this becomes more common, we may see tacit collusion emerging with lower levels of concentration than we did in the past. In the past, you might need a very small number of firms to be looking and reacting, while now it might be a larger number of firms if they're using algorithms and it's easy to observe prices and react very quickly. The economics say that that could lead to more collusion, and it's going to be very hard for us to fully address that through policy. So that's something that we really need some good ideas about how to deal with tacit collusion in that way. We have some tools, but I fear that we may need more. And we may need to have stronger merger policy as a result. We need to relook at the concentration levels that give us concern, if that's in industries where that's a concern. A second thing is just how these recent advances in AI can be balanced, how we can balance our critical policy objectives. Of course, there's so many dimensions of safety and fairness and bias and just mistakes that can come up in using these new AI models, and we're so far behind with the tools that we could have that would make it easy and cheap for a well-intentioned firm to check that their AI is meeting all of these societal objectives. And then the concern is that if we don't have good tools and we don't have cheap and easy available tools, then only the big firms will be able to comply with different types of regulations. It could hurt barriers to entry, and of course, regulators can be captured by large firms and write regulations in a way that unintentionally bias things in favor of big firms. So something that's been really exciting to be in the Biden administration, there's a whole of government approach to competition, and here we're trying very hard to make sure that every time somebody is thinking about regulations, that we are actually remembering competition. And then a final trend that I'll close with is just this interdisciplinary approaches to the implementation, evaluation, and policy around technology. We've seen this in industry, we see this in academics, and I'm seeing that in government too. At Stanford, I was involved in cross-disciplinary efforts for AI research, founding an institute. In my lab, I had a mix of labor economists, behavioral economists, psychologists, and computer scientists, engineers, because all those people need to work together to build beneficial technology that meets societal objectives. And so we're increasingly seeing those kinds of multidisciplinary approaches in investigations and in competition policy as well, whether it's behavioral economists or computer scientists testifying at trials. And so my hope in the future is that we will be able to keep up and in fact innovate in government and these interdisciplinary approaches to making sure that all of this amazing technology benefits society and is developed in a way that where we have the competition that we need to make sure that the firms are responsive to what the customers and society wants. So I'll stop there. I'm happy to take questions.
Yeah, Susan, thank you so very much. You just provided us with a unique blend of practical and academic thought. So thanks a lot. I see questions coming in the Q&A. We have the luxury of having you with us for 5 more minutes. So let me try to make sense of those questions. And actually, I had prepared questions, but luckily you answered them all. Although there is one that indeed came to my mind, and I see that Alfonso had a similar question. When you said that it might be easier to explain machine learning models than to explain advanced econometrics, the question, I guess, is whether this is indeed something that you considered at the DOJ, when going to litigation, the willingness of a judge to take the evidence, regardless of the quality of the evidence. And the Alfonso question was kind of related because indeed there is a black box issue, right? So this may be something that a judge may always return to you. So what is your take on that?
I just want to be clear. I'm giving my own personal opinions about the future, about things that we haven't done yet in terms of, explaining machine learning to a judge as part of like an economic analysis. I have a lot of experience explaining it to other non-specialist audiences. And so that's really what I was basing my opinion on there. When I teach my classes about machine learning and causal inference at Stanford, I would often say that, a linear regression is easy to interpret, but it's also easy to misinterpret. If the purpose of the regression is to try to adjust for other factors so that you get an all else equal comparison, so that you can compare a treated and control group, while here like a treatment might be a market that had entry to a market that didn't have entry, something like that. If you have a treated and control group, you might use a regression to adjust for other factors that you want to hold constant. But it's hard to explain why they should be in there linearly or quadratic or cubic or something else. And then the expert has to explain why they chose linear or quadratic or cubic. And then they have to present 5 different versions and explain why you get different answers and why the fact that you get different answers doesn't invalidate the whole exercise, right? Yeah. But if you had a machine learning model that was selecting the model specification for that part of the model, and that's the way the academic methods work, is that they kind of use machine learning for the predictive part, the part where you're adjusting for things, then actually there's well-defined tools for choosing which one do you pick. You pick the specification that meets certain criteria of goodness of fit. And so I think it's easier to explain that than it is to explain omitted variable bias and explain polynomials and extrapolation and all sorts of other stuff. So I don't think that it's easy to explain any of them, but every method has complications. And so we work really hard. You sit in a conference room for days and you try different explanations and you try to make sure you've got the most important factors and you're telling the truth and you're boiling it down. I once explained that, like the idea of a test set is like, you're hiding the answer key in the desk drawer for the teacher's office, and then you send them students off and then you check and see if they got the answers right. And, the audience got that. So I think those are the things that we just have to practice, getting those analogies and explanations up so that you, and then in some ways that makes the job of the expert easier. It's your job is hard when you have to like make all of these little choices. And the old-fashioned econometrics way is that by hand you made dozens of choices, each of which could be a problem. So the more you can kind of have an algorithmic approach to the parts of the problem that really should be done by an algorithm, the easier your job is in a way. So I can't get into all the details because that's really the whole thing this literature I worked in for the last 10 years is about how to combine predictive models and causal models in the right way. But I'll say that, at the end of that whole research agenda, there's a decomposition into the predictive and the causal parts, and you can often have objective criteria for showing why you do what you do.
So the example you just gave in your explanation to the judge reminded me of what I did just last week using ChatGPT when I asked, explain quantum physics as if I was 10 years old, right? And usually it works quite well. So let me ask maybe a final question, which also is one that I had on top of my mind and that I see in the chat. So what is the DOJ policy when it comes to not relying on the tools that you will develop internally, but acquiring those to companies? And I see a question in the chat related to the data that you need for those tools to be efficient. Are you generating your own data sets, or are you buying data set from private companies? So what is your approach here?
So in principle, it could be any number of things. Sometimes there's publicly available data. Sometimes you can buy data. We have these civil investigative demands, and we don't have a lot of money, so we often rely on data from the parties, and sometimes publicly available data is just the aggregated version of the actual data. So generally, we go right to the source and get the actual data. But occasionally, it's also helpful to use other kinds of data sources, like you would use in academic research. So those are any and all can be used. I wouldn't say that we're at DOJ. We're not in the antitrust division. We're not doing a lot of designing new software packages, although our experts might. I mean, it's a little hard to define these terms because in structural industrial organization, sometimes every paper has a new algorithm of some sort in computer science lingo, a new estimator. I mean, when you're estimating a structural model, the equations of that model are often tailored to the industry. And so the specific thing you're doing could be completely novel, say that our experts were doing. But usually we'd be more commonly using off-the-shelf packages. And I think the challenges are just that, if you need to scale up where you might need GPUs, then that's generally going to be something like Python. And if you're going to be doing Python, then you need to install these packages and so on. And that can be cumbersome and challenging. But I think even while I've been here, we've made quite a bit of advance in our ability to, more nimbly get the tools we need for each particular case. But I'd say it's not easy. We've gotten better. And I think all across the world, governments are going to have to figure out how to maintain their safety and security, which is, of course, crucial, while being able to use tools that are, not produced the way they used to be.
Yeah, and I'm reminded of the French Competition Agency may not be the only one, but with a GitHub page, right? So it might also be that competition agencies will cooperate towards maintaining security of those tools. On that, Susan, again, thank you so very much. Indeed, last year I did not realize, but we had another keynote from someone from the DOJ, and having you this year is a real pleasure. So hope to see you in person. Yeah, on that, I'll move on to the next panel.